On a cold night in December 1991, Austin, Texas was shaken by a crime so heinous it would haunt the city for more than 3 decades. 4 teenage girls were discovered dead inside an I-can't-believe-it's yogurt shop. They had been bound, gagged, and shot, and the shop had been set on fire. The case quickly became one of the most notorious unsolved murders in the United States, inspiring true crime books, endless speculation, and more recently an HBO documentary. For years, police seemed stumped, and multiple false leads and controversial confessions led nowhere. Now in 2025, officials believe they finally have an answer. After decades of persistence and recent advances in DNA technology, investigators have identified a suspect, though he cannot face trial because he is no longer alive. In this video, we'll revisit the chilling case, from that fateful night in 1991 through the twists and turns of the investigation to the explosive developments announced in 2025. Buckle in as we explore the tragedy, the investigation's twists and turns, and the new evidence that may finally solve the yogurt shop murders. A quiet December evening turns deadly. Austin in the early 1990s was a vibrant college town beginning to develop its reputation as a music and tech hub. On the evening of December 6, 1991, 17-year-olds Jennifer Harbison and Eliza Thomas were working the closing shift at the I-can't-believe-it's yogurt shop in a strip mall. Jennifer's 15-year-old sister Sarah Harbison and their friend Amy Ayres, just 13, came by to wait for a ride home. The girls were part of Future Farmers of America, and the Harbisons came from a local dairy farming family. The yogurt shop job was a simple way for them to earn extra spending money and hang out with friends. That night, the 4 laughed, cleaned the shop, and prepared to close. Around closing time, investigators believed that someone entered through a back door. Patrons later reported seeing 2 men acting suspiciously at a table near closing. A police patrolman driving by around midnight noticed smoke billowing from the strip mall. Firefighters rushed in and discovered a scene that still gives long-time detectives nightmares. The bodies of Amy, Jennifer, Sarah, and Eliza were in the back of the shop. They had been bound with items of their own clothing, gagged, and shot in the head. To hide evidence, the killer had doused the area in accelerant and set the building on fire. The blaze destroyed much of the physical evidence. Water used to extinguish the flames contaminated the rest. Without surveillance cameras in the shop and with credit card payments relatively rare in 1991, it was difficult to trace who had been in the shop that night. Police managed to collect swabs from the victims for DNA testing, but forensic science was still in its infancy. Early investigation and false leads. The brutality of the crime shocked the nation. Local detectives and the FBI formed a task force. Investigators sifted through hundreds of potential suspects and interviewed anyone who had been near the shop that day. Tips poured in from all over the state. Because 3 of the girls had been partially unclothed, authorities believed at least one of them was sexually assaulted. But without reliable evidence, the case quickly grew cold. In 1999, 8 years after the murders, a new team of investigators revisited the case. Their attention turned to 4 men who had been teenagers in 1991: Robert Springsteen, Michael Scott, Morris Pierce, and Forrest Wellborn. Pierce had been arrested soon after the murders with a .22 caliber pistol at a mall near the yogurt shop, the same type of weapon believed to have been used in the killings. When questioned at the time, he denied involvement but named his friends as possible suspects. Under intense interrogation in 1999, both Springsteen and Scott confessed. They described graphic details of the murders and implicated each other. Law enforcement and the media hailed the confessions as a breakthrough. However, cracks in the case quickly appeared. The confessions were obtained after marathon interrogations. Springsteen and Scott later recanted, saying they were coerced. No physical evidence tied any of the four men to the scene. Nonetheless, prosecutors charged all four with capital murder. Charges against Pierce and Wellborn were eventually dropped because of insufficient evidence. Springsteen and Scott went to trial, and their confessions, often inconsistent with each other, were the primary evidence. Both were convicted and received long prison sentences. Overturned convictions and exonerations. The convictions did not end the controversy. Civil libertarians and crime experts criticized the reliance on conflicting confessions and the lack of forensic evidence. The Sixth Amendment guarantees defendants the right to confront witnesses. However, in the separate trials, jurors heard one defendant's confession implicating the other without an opportunity for cross-examination. Appellate courts agreed, overturning the convictions on constitutional grounds. By the mid-2000s, the state prepared to retry Springsteen and Scott. A technological development halted the retrial. Advances in Y-chromosome STR-DNA testing allowed scientists to isolate male DNA from the vaginal swabs collected in 1991. A partial male DNA profile was extracted. When prosecutors compared it to DNA from Springsteen, Scott, Pierce, and Wellborn, none of them matched. Rather than proceed with a trial built on shaky confessions and contradicted by forensic evidence, Travis County District Attorney Rosemary Lemberg dropped all charges in 2009. Springsteen and Scott were released from prison after nearly a decade behind bars. The decision was bittersweet. On one hand, two men who appeared to have been coerced into confessing regained their freedom. On the other, the city still had no idea who murdered the four girls. As the years wore on, investigators tried new DNA techniques, reaching out to genealogists and private labs. They compared the partial Y-STR profile to national databases and genealogical records, hoping to identify the mystery man. Families of the victims continued to speak publicly to keep the case alive. Jennifer and Sarah Harbison's mother, Barbara Ayres Wilson, regularly appeared at events and in documentaries, urging authorities to keep investigating. The case became part of Austin's collective memory, a story whispered at parties and retold by true crime enthusiasts. The community's trauma and cultural memory. Decades of uncertainty took a heavy toll on the victims' families. In the first episode of the HBO docuseries The Yogurt Shop Murders, Eliza Thomas's sister Sonora recalls that when she heard the news, her teeth chattered uncontrollably and she had to hold her jaw shut. She remembers nervously cleaning the house while her mother locked herself in her bedroom, unable to face the police. Sean Ayres, brother of Amy Ayres, says there isn't a day he doesn't think of his sister. Pam Ayres, Amy's mother, thinks of her daughter whenever she sees children or animals. Bittersweet reminders of the life Amy was denied. Austin as a community also carried the weight of the crime. Filmmaker Margaret Brown, who directed the docuseries, noted that the murders are part of Austin's mythos. For people who grew up in the 1990s, the case was a cautionary tale about safety and an example of how evil can intrude on ordinary life. The strip mall where the yogurt shop once stood became a makeshift memorial. Over the years, crime tours and books, such as Who Killed These Girls, kept the story alive. Yet without a perpetrator, the narrative remained unresolved. The lack of closure also fueled rumors. Some believed the murders were gang-related, others suspected transient criminals. The docuseries explores numerous theories, including the possibility of an attempted robbery gone wrong. In one of the more bizarre theories, a man claimed to have dreamed of the crime and implicated his friends. This led to the false confessions that would later be thrown out. The unresolved case kept people guessing, which is perhaps why it continued to haunt Central Texas for so long. Advances in forensic science and renewed interest. The early 2020s ushered in a boom in forensic genealogy. Cases once considered cold were being solved through genetic data linked to public DNA databases. The release of the HBO docuseries in August 2025 reignited public attention. Each episode blended archival footage, interviews with investigators and suspects, and the emotional accounts of families. Viewers learned how Detective John Jones and others never gave up. They saw rare footage of Robert Springsteen shopping for a suit after his release and glimpsed the painstaking investigative work behind the scenes. The docuseries also highlighted how the crime scene was mishandled. Firefighters' water hoses washed away potential fingerprints, and the accelerant used to start the blaze destroyed trace evidence. Because the girls were stripped and bound, some evidence might have been on their clothing, but the fire rendered much of it useless. Early DNA tests were inconclusive, and the technology to extract male profiles from mixed samples simply did not exist in 1991. By 2025, however, investigators were using sophisticated techniques that could analyze minute fragments of DNA. That progress would finally yield a breakthrough. The breakthrough: identifying Robert Eugene Brashers. In late September 2025, news outlets across the country lit up with a startling headline. Austin police identify suspect in 1991 yogurt shop murders. The Austin Police Department issued a statement saying they had identified a suspect using a wide range of DNA testing. The suspect was Robert Eugene Brashers, a serial killer and rapist who had operated across several states in the 1990s. Brashers was born in 1959 and had a lengthy criminal record that included attempted murder, burglary, and impersonating a police officer. He had been implicated in multiple violent crimes: the 1990 strangulation of Genevieve Zatricki in South Carolina, the 1997 rape of a 14-year-old in Memphis, and the 1998 murder of Sherry and Megan Scherer in Missouri. He ended it in January 1999 during an armed standoff with police in Kennett, Missouri. According to retired Detective John Jones, the link to Brashers came from a bullet casing discovered in a drain at the crime scene. Investigators compared the casing to the gun Brashers used to end it, and ballistic experts said they were consistent. More importantly, advanced DNA testing on the partial male profile obtained from one of the victims matched Brashers. The match was also confirmed through genealogical research and by comparing DNA from living relatives of Brashers. In other words, the mystery DNA that did not belong to the original suspects now pointed directly to a serial killer with a history of violence against women. The announcement explained why earlier DNA tests did not match any of the young men originally prosecuted. It also confirmed that the murders were likely committed by a single adult rather than a group of teenagers, as one of the original detectives had long argued. The organized method of binding the victims, controlling them, and then setting a fire suggested an experienced offender rather than impulsive youths. Brashers fit that profile. He had committed similarly brutal crimes and eluded detection for years. Reaction from families and investigators. Families of the victims expressed a mixture of relief, sadness, and frustration. After nearly 34 years of waiting, they finally had a name. However, because Brashers was deceased, there would be no trial, no confession, and no opportunity to confront him. Austin police emphasized that the case remains an open investigation despite the identification. They continue to examine evidence to determine whether anyone else was involved or whether Brashers acted alone. Investigators have also been in touch with the families to share information and offer support. "Our team never gave up working this case," the Austin Police Department stated. "For almost 34 years, they have worked tirelessly and remained committed to solving this case for the families of Jennifer Harbison, Sarah Harbison, Eliza Thomas, and Amy Ayers." One of the most emotional responses came from Brashers' daughter, Deborah Brashers Clonch. She told local television stations that she had been an infant when the yogurt shop murders occurred, and just 8 years old when her father died. Learning that he was a suspect in this famous case was devastating. "I am very sorry to every family that my father hurt," she said. "Half of my DNA is the person that hurt you the most. So I want to tell you sorry, and I am so sorry for everything. But I am finally glad that you are getting answers." Her words highlight how the ripple effects of violent crime can extend to the perpetrator's own family, leaving them grappling with guilt and shame for acts they did not commit. John Jones, the retired detective who first spoke publicly about the new suspect, told CBS News that the development came through DNA and ballistics. He had long believed the original teenagers were innocent, and he expressed relief that the evidence vindicated his instinct. Jones said he hopes the identification will bring some peace to the victims' families, even though Brashers can never be prosecuted. Remaining questions and ongoing investigation. While the identification of Brashers is a major breakthrough, it does not answer every question. Investigators still need to establish Brashers' motive. Did he target the yogurt shop because he thought it would be an easy robbery, or was there another reason he entered the store that night? Some theorize that he broke in intending to burglarize the register and encountered the girls unexpectedly, leading him to commit a brutal, premeditated murder to eliminate witnesses. Others point out that Brashers had a history of sexual violence and might have planned to assault someone that night. Without a confession, the true motive may never be known. Another open question is whether Brashers acted alone. Early reports suggested two men were seen acting furtively inside the shop near closing time. If there were two perpetrators, investigators must determine who the second person was and whether he or she is still alive. Police have not ruled out the possibility of accomplices and continue to follow leads. The case also raises questions about investigative practices. The initial reliance on coerced confessions underscores the dangers of intense interrogations without corroborating evidence. Had the convictions of Springsteen and Scott not been overturned, the real killer might never have been identified. The success of genealogical DNA testing demonstrates the importance of preserving evidence and continually retesting it as technology advances. Closing thoughts. The yogurt shop murders haunted Austin for more than 3 decades, tearing apart families and seeding distrust in the criminal justice system. The case is a stark reminder of how violence can shatter the innocence of a community and leave wounds that last a lifetime. It also shows the power of perseverance. Investigators refused to close the file. Families continued to push for answers. Journalists kept telling the story. Advances in DNA technology ultimately provided the breakthrough that conventional detective work could not. For the families of Amy Ayres, Jennifer and Sarah Harbison, and Eliza Thomas, the identification of Robert Eugene Brashers provides a measure of closure. There will be no trial, but there is, finally, a name. The case remains open, and police continue to investigate whether anyone else was involved. As viewers and listeners of true crime media, we should remember that behind every headline are real people who loved and were loved. We owe it to them to tell their stories with care and empathy.